Hi, everybody. This is Noelle from Petitti Garden Centers, and we're at our Oakwood Village store, and it's time for tomatoes. Yes, finally. And so our tomato spotlight today, we're going to talk about all the things you need for tomato success. And we'll talk about little particulars. I'm not going to go into major varieties because, my goodness, there are so many out there. But I will talk about types, so we can kind of get more familiar with all the different types available. So to start out with tomatoes, you want to have 6 or more hours of full direct sun on your tomato plants. They need it. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes when I read through different articles and things about tomatoes, some people say 8 or more hours of direct sunlight. So for us, 6 or more hours is considered full sun condition, and that's where you want to grow your tomatoes. If you have 8 hours or more, great. I think you'll do very, very well with that. But typically 6 or more, really, really good. The next thing with soil, and tomatoes are no exception from most of your garden plants. You want well-drained, richly amended soils, okay? You can grow tomatoes in a garden bed. Absolutely, you can do that. You can grow them in containers as well, as long as you take care of that soil requirement, okay? So well-drained, richly amended soils. So we will tell you, when you are gardening, we want you to make sure you've worked on the garden soil, prepped it very well, added compost, added sweet peat, whatever works for you, planting mixes, all those types of things. Any organic matter that you can add into that soil is going to be beneficial for those tomatoes. Now, when we move into the watering concerns with these, this will make sense here. So when we say well-drained, richly amended soils, we want you to keep them evenly moist. And the key there is that even moisture to just slightly dry, okay? But here's the thing. If you keep those tomatoes watered well, evenly moist to just slightly dry, and stay on a maintenance program, like try to keep it very, very even, you will see less blossom end rot, okay? So that's when the bottoms of the tomatoes turn black, okay? And ultimately, it has to do a lot with the watering maintenance on your tomatoes. So it's the same thing if you're growing them in a container or growing them in the ground. You want to make sure that soil stays evenly moist to just slightly dry, okay? We always want you to water in the morning. We want you to water at the base of the tomato, not over the tops of the foliage. That can really cause some diseases and other fungal issues and things. But at the base in the morning, slow, deep watering. We always talk about that with our plant health. That will always be really good for the root development to move down into the soil. And if you are growing them in garden beds, we highly recommend kind of mounding up the soil and planting that tomato deeply so that you've prepared that soil fairly deep, because tomatoes really like to be deeply planted. They like to get their roots established. And when you water slow and deeply, it will move those roots down into the soil for you. They'll be much healthier, much happier moving down through the soil. So again, that's your sun, your soil, your water. Okay, the next thing that we often talk about is the fertilization for tomatoes. And I'm going to tell you, whatever fertilizer works best for you is great, okay? What we like to use and plant with our tomatoes is we will use Espoma's Tomato Tone, okay? Tomato Tone has essential nutrients for tomatoes, plus it has added calcium. So calcium, going back to blossom end rot, can also help reduce that problem of blossom end rot. Again, ultimately, it's how you water and stick to an even watering schedule, but the calcium can ultimately help reduce the occurrence of that too, okay? So Tomato Tone all day long. I don't mean all day long, but follow the package directions when you're applying it. and you'll be applying it regularly according to the package directions and according to how many tomatoes you are planting, okay? So do pay attention to that. And we like Tomato Tone again. It is going to be a slow release organic fertilizer for those tomatoes. It will help really benefit the soil. And then, of course, it makes the nutrients available in that soil become and benefit the tomatoes. Okay, so ultimately you're feeding your soil to feed your tomatoes with your organic fertilizers. Okay, very good. Maintenance. Woo, there's so much maintenance, right, with tomatoes. And it really has to do with what types of tomatoes that you do end up growing. So most of the time we'll classify tomatoes in two different categories. One is the indeterminate class. Indeterminate basically means vining tomato that continues to flower and produce all season long. So it's going to continue to grow, flower, keep on growing, flowering, producing, and you're going to be harvesting all through the season once that plant really starts to produce for you. So that's an indeterminate tomato. Those tomatoes, typically because they are vining types, they will need some support. And support is really, really important for indeterminate types because, of course, whenever you're supporting that tomato with a cage, a stake, a trellis, whatever you prefer to use, it really helps ultimately with the air circulation around that plant, reduces the incidence of disease because you're getting good air circulation around that plant. You're also getting the best sunlight penetration into those vining tomatoes as well. Okay, so that's an indeterminate type. The other type that we classify tomatoes is determinate. Okay, determinate meaning that they are going to flower really heavily all at one time. They are going to develop fruit really heavily all at one time. You are going to be harvesting basically all at one time. So you're going to have a really big harvest when those plants come to full maturity. And that's great. And that's the type of tomato that we will typically use for making sauces, canning, all of those types of things, because we get a lot at once and we can go through and we can process and do all the things that we want to do with those tomatoes. Okay, so those are determinate types. Are there some tomatoes that kind of fall in a semi-determinate category where they're halfway in between indeterminate and determinate? Yes, absolutely. So you will see tomatoes that sometimes perform sort of in the middle there. There's not a lot of those tomatoes, but yes, there are some tomatoes that kind of perform both ways. And I'm going to tell you, even where up above we have our hanging basket tomatoes. And these guys are supposed to be determinate up here, but they really continue to flush. So what will happen is they'll get a big flush of flowers. Like now we see them all flowering and fruited up. And once those are picked, they'll flush real heavily again. So that's something that, to me, they sort of perform in that like right in between the indeterminate and the determinate types. They're supposed to be determinate, but they keep going. So needless to say, we're there. We've got two classes of tomatoes there that we normally, everybody, separates those tomatoes that way. Then, okay, so the next thing that you're looking for is you're looking for different types of tomatoes for different purposes, when you are eating them. So the first type that I normally talk about is a cherry, a grape, those smaller tomatoes. Sometimes a pear tomato falls into that category where they're smaller tomatoes, and usually in that nice small package, they are the sweetest tomatoes out there. So they have the highest sugar content typically. Sometimes that's measured in Brix units, if you've ever heard of Brix before, BRIX. And so that is just indicative of that high sugar content, very, very sweet flavor in those small packages. Sometimes heirloom tomatoes have a high Brix content to them as well. So you'll find that some tomatoes, just depending on the variety, have these very, very sweet types of flavors. So again, you'll find that. So I'll start with those smallest tomatoes. Again, the grapes, the cherries, the pears, sometimes they're on the smaller side. And we will use those obviously for snacking and of course for salads. Very, very easy to use for salads. The next type of tomato that we typically use is that globe, just that round, beautiful red or yellow, typically orange. Again, sort of medium size, but to me, it's multi-purpose. So those types of tomatoes we can use just about anywhere. We can use them sliced in salads, use them for canning and sauces, those types of things, salsa even. And those types of tomatoes are really fun to have, typically because there's lots of different varieties that'll produce early, mid, and late for you. Lots of different flavor profiles, but typically they have that very tangy, classic tomato taste for you. And again, just multi-purpose. So you can use them however you want to use them in the kitchen and cooking and so forth. Next type of tomato that we often see is like a paste tomato, where we'll call these paste tomatoes or plum tomatoes, okay? So those are your classic Italian tomatoes, typically, where they have sort of an elongated body to them. They're fairly meaty on the inside. They have very low seed count in them. So that's nice too, again, because when you're processing and making sauce and paste and so forth, that's great. You don't have to worry about so many seeds, okay? But I know folks that will use paste tomatoes in salsa. Paste tomatoes can be very sweet tasting as well. So they'll cut them up for salads and things too. So it just kind of depends what you like, what you've tried. And again, with gardening, we experiment a lot with different types just to see how they grow well for us and how they perform in the garden and how we can use them, around in the kitchen as well. Okay, so paste tomato types. And lots of times your paste tomatoes are going to be that determinate type again, where they produce a lot at once, and that is definitely their purpose there. But there are some indeterminate types too that you can harvest throughout the season. So just depending on what you're looking for there. The fourth kind of tomato that we often see is the beefsteak type. So beefsteak tomatoes are typically a very large tomato. They are heavy producers typically, and boy, do they have a lot of substance in them. So a lot of flesh. They're very tasty. They can be very juicy as well, but they make really good slicing tomatoes or sandwich tomatoes. Sometimes you'll hear folks talk about sandwich tomatoes. So that usually one slice can take up, a piece of bread size. So that's always really nice to have those beefsteak tomatoes. And they have, like I said, a little bit of maybe a denser or meatier flesh too. So again, you can use them multi-purpose. We don't really want you to, isolate certain types of tomatoes to just certain types of cooking. You can really use them on a lot of different occasions as well. The last type of tomato that I wanted to talk about was heirloom tomatoes. And heirloom tomatoes are very unique, very different among all the red tomatoes and possibly yellow or gold tomatoes that you see out there. Heirloom tomatoes are a tomato that is actually usually has a 50-year or older pedigree to it. So it's been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And these types of tomato plants are what we call open pollinated, meaning that they pollinate naturally. And what happens is that if you grow those types of heirloom tomatoes and you save the seeds from year to year, that you can continue to produce that tomato, that same tomato, okay? So popular varieties, things like Brandywine. Brandywine by far is a very, very popular variety. Mortgage Lifter is a really big heirloom as well. Cherokee Purple. So sometimes you see unusual colors, purples, greens, pinks, stripes, lots of different colors there, oranges as well. So with the heirloom tomatoes, you get a lot of variety, a lot of uniqueness. And with that uniqueness, you get a lot of very interesting flavor profiles in those tomatoes too. And a lot of different shapes too. So again, heirloom tomatoes, very, very, very rewarding to grow, but they can also be very, very slow because they are not bred to have some of the disease resistance or maybe some of the other traits that your hybrid tomatoes were bred for, vigorousness, strength of stem, large, disease-resistant leaves, those types of things. So you just have to give yourself some time with those heirloom tomatoes. And again, experiment with the varieties that you really enjoy and really prefer the flavor for. So those are going to be did I go through 5 different types? Yeah, 5 different types of general classes of tomatoes there, okay? The other thing that we need to pay attention to with tomatoes is, of course, the maintenance, right? So when you come in and you are looking for a tomato, you're always looking for a very healthy plant. You want to pull out that pot, make sure that your leaves look green and healthy. Everything's looking good. Look at the undersides, of course, of the leaves. Look at the stem. Make sure everything's looking really nice. I've got some root growth coming off the bottom, so I know that plant has rooted all the way through that soil in its pot. And then this was actually, if you look really close at the tomato plant, these leaves down below that don't look like a typical tomato leaf down here, those are the cotyledon leaves, okay? So that's actually that seed, the sides of the seed as it was producing. So these are not true leaves down below. So you'd actually remove those cotyledon leaves, okay? You don't need them as this tomato grows. And as you continue to plant, and when you're getting ready to plant this tomato, I would also remove about 2 to 3 sets of lower leaves so we can plant this tomato deeper. So I'm going to remove this leaf set, and also this leaf set, okay? And so when we do plant this tomato, we're going to put the roots and all underground and actually cover up that last leaf set, okay? So I've planted this tomato, when you do go around and plant it in the garden, a good 6 to 8 inches deep, okay? Leave this is going to be your bottom leaf set sticking out of the soil. And then, of course, we're going to continue to have this tomato grow up out of the ground, okay? So do keep that in mind when you're planting. They do like to be deeply planted, okay? That's really, really important with tomatoes. And if you're growing them in containers, make sure that container is deep. We like to see them in 12 inches depth or more. And that's why growing in like a 5-gallon bucket with drainage holes in the bottom, that's actually a really nice depth for tomatoes, so that those roots again can grow down and really establish themselves deeply in a planter like that, okay? So keep that in mind when you are growing tomatoes, especially in containers. Another thing that you should look for with tomatoes is, if you are growing them in containers, sometimes look for varieties that have a really thick stem and have some keywords. So Taylor, I'm going to move this way, and I'm right by the husky red cherry tomato. Now, this tomato is real short right now, but look at how thick this stem is, and it's not like the one that I just showed you where it was kind of growing up and growing a little bit off to the side again, because that was a vining type. But these are bushy types, and they do have that thicker stem through here. So these tomatoes stay nice and compact and really nice and bushy for you. So when you're growing them in containers, you typically don't need the support that some of the other vining tomatoes will grow. Again, the husky red varieties are going to be more of a determinate type. So that is really more of a bushy type of plant. And again, doesn't take up as much space sometimes as the vining tomatoes do. So look for that when you're shopping for tomatoes, especially when you're looking to plant them in smaller spaces like pots and containers. Look for the husky or the patio types. That will always help you determine, oh, okay, that's going to be maybe a better choice for growing in, or bush types, like there's early girl bush, for example, versus straight early girl. The early girl bush, I think, would be a better choice for growing in a container, but you could use early girl if you wanted to. She's just going to need some support because she's more of a vining habit, okay? So do look for that. Some of these tomatoes have more of a potato leaf to them, and I want to show you that as well. And I just picked up a hillbilly tomato. Hillbilly tomato is an heirloom type, and you see how this leaf is really similar to a potato leaf. In the nightshade family, you'll find that very, very often. And so sometimes that can indicate an heirloom variety for you. So if you see this potato leaf, it typically is a little bit more heirloom type, might be indicative of a little bit slower growing, might take its time in order to really develop the flowering and the fruiting on that. Instead of that's more cut leaf on your typical hybrid tomatoes. So you will see more of a cut leaf on these with several lobes instead of that potato leaf, okay? The next thing that I wanted to show you as well are the grafted varieties of tomatoes, okay? Grafting your tomatoes basically takes your desirable tomato that you want to grow and puts them on a very vigorous rootstock. This is what we have done for hundreds of years with all of our fruiting trees. So when you're eating an apple, you're usually eating a grafted type apple. And that apple that you're eating, let's say it's a Golden Delicious, for example, that apple has been grafted onto usually crabapple stock, believe it or not, because crab apples can be very vigorous and very, very strong growing. And so therefore they give that Golden Delicious apple those attributes or traits, right, when it's growing. So we are doing that with tomatoes now too, where you have maybe a slower growing tomato like an heirloom variety, and we put it on a more vigorous disease resistant rootstock. And the next thing you know, you're getting better yields, faster yields, those types of things on those types of tomatoes that might be a little bit older, a little bit slower growing, and you're getting better results. So you'll always find grafted tomatoes like that as well. Grafted tomatoes can get fairly large, folks, so you'll see them in larger pots for us, these 12-inch pots with the cage. But again, the grafted varieties are going to be performing a little bit more vigorously for you. So that's always a good option as well if you're looking to have a little bit more yield and harvest for you in the long run. Okay, other things to keep in mind with tomatoes. Again, they can get some insects, not so great insects out there. They might get some disease here and there, and I can't stress the importance of scouting your plants daily, every other day, getting out there and looking through them, trying to observe anything that looks different. Maybe leaves are starting to curl. So, look into that. See if there's any insects that are underneath those leaves. Maybe you're really starting to see, a darkening of foliage or something's happening. If you just are more aware and you're out there looking at the plants daily, that is going to help you in the long run to identify what's happening very quickly, and then also being able to prevent future things from happening, right? So in the case of pests, if you see aphids, whitefly, all of those types of guys on the tomatoes, the first thing I would recommend is a cold stream of water. And I would go ahead and really try to hit and get as many of those insects off those plants, okay? The next thing probably would be more of an organic approach or natural approach is use a insecticidal soap or maybe a neem oil to kind of cover the plants, try to keep those other pesky insects away from the plant material, okay? So those are really good options. Just make sure that you're applying those either early morning or in the evening we're kind of wanting to keep away from pollinators, number one, but number two, we don't want to burn the leaves and cause any further damage as well. So sometimes when you're spraying those on the plants midday, that can cause a little bit of burn. So watch for that, okay? If it's a disease issue, again, think about that support, the trellising, the caging, what have you, making sure that the air circulation is moving through the plant material. Maybe you've planted your tomatoes too closely, okay? That the foliage has become too dense. Maybe you need to remove some foliage off the bottom of the plant if it's yellowing and not looking so happy, because there's been a lot of rain and it's splashing up on the bottom of the leaves and just causing some yellowing and some damage. So again, those types of things keep in mind, and you can remove foliage here and there and also suckering growth. So as your tomatoes get a little bit larger, and Taylor will show you a close-up of this, but in between the main branches, there's usually a little bit of suckering growth in here, and I'm just gonna reach in and take my fingernail and clip it off. But that was a little sucker right there between the main branches, the main stem and a main branch. And so the suckering growth was already growing up. Those are just pulling energy away from that main tomato plant. So do remove your suckers. That's always a good way to do that. And again, it opens up that plant to air circulation. So think about that as well when you are growing tomatoes. And if you have an issue, please take a picture. You can always send it to our website under Contact Us. We'll take a look. We'll try to diagnose it as best we can. If you want to stop out at our Petitti locations, absolutely. Put the leaf in a little baggie and go ahead and bring it in, and we'll take a look at it and see what we can diagnose for you, and then hopefully ultimately prevent those things happening down the line. Wanted to show you the tomato types, of course, as we go through. And again, 5 major types. There are so many different types of tomatoes, folks. So like I said, experiment with your tomatoes, and really enjoy them. Just remember that, tomatoes really do well with companion plants out there in the garden. So you can plant tomatoes with a lot of herbs, especially basils, do very, very well with your tomatoes. I like to plant tomatoes with your onion family, chives, those types of things too. Those help as deterrents to keep some of your not so great insects away from the plants. And of course, you can always plant your marigolds around your tomatoes as a nice trap crop deterrent as well. Pull the whitefly away from tomatoes. So there's a lot of good companion plants out there that you can grow with your tomato family, and it'll really make them perform very, very well, keep some of the bad insects off, and they can do very nicely too. Okay, folks, enjoy your tomatoes.